Union Depot Foundation has raised their $550,000 portion of the Jeffris Family Foundation grant. The Keokuk Union Depot Foundation had to match a third of the grant. The total money will be going towards restoring the Keokuk Union Depot waiting room. The rest of the grant being raised, officials say they just need to finish up a few last things before the depot will be fully restored.
It will be used inside to restore the original tile floor of the depot and to restore the lighting that originally in 1891 was combination gas and electric, but they're going to try to research what kind of fixtures were used and simulate that as best they can.
And officials say the interior restoration of the station should be done by the end of the winter and will not be available for events during that time.